On the 19th of April, 2008, at 4:32 a.m., a 19-year-old girl was rushed to a hospital in the small Austrian town of Amstetten. Her condition was anything but ordinary. She was extremely weak, and her skin was so pale it looked like she had never seen the sunday. Doctors discovered that her physical state resembled that of someone who had been imprisoned for years, malnourished and fragile. What was even stranger was the old man who brought her in. He claimed to be her grandfather, but when asked to fill out her medical information, he fumbled over basic questions, giving confused and inconsistent answers. The doctor's instincts told them something wasn't right, so they called the police. No one could have imagined that this seemingly routine hospital visit would unravel one of the most shocking crimes in modern history. A 24-year underground imprisonment case, a tragedy that crossed every line of human morality. And the man behind it all was none other than the elderly man who brought her in 3-year-old Josef Fritzl. To understand this case, we have to go back to 1984. That year, Josef Fritzl was 49 years old. To the people of Amstetten, he looked like an ordinary, middle-aged man. He was involved in real estate, earned a decent income, and owned a 3-story house at 40 Ibs Street. His wife, Rosemarie, was a housewife, and together they had 7 children. To neighbors, Josef was a strict but seemingly normal father. He had a bad temper, but nothing that raised red flags. To the outside world, they were just another Austrian family. But on the 28th of August 1984, everything changed. Josef and Rosemarie's 8-year-old daughter, Elisabeth, went missing. Josef went to the police and reported her as a runaway. He said Elisabeth had always been rebellious and had tried to run away before. The police did a basic investigation but found no trace of her. And since she was 18, legally an adult, there wasn't much they could do. The case slowly faded into a cold file. Rosemarie was heartbroken, but she trusted Josef's story that Elisabeth had left to start a new life somewhere. But no one knew that Elisabeth was actually locked beneath their feet, unable to make a sound. Josef's crime wasn't impulsive, it was carefully planned. Back in 1978, when Elisabeth was only 12, Josef started secretly digging out a hidden basement space under the house. It took him 6 years to build what would become a private prison. The entrance was sealed with a 500-kilogram reinforced concrete door. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary wall. Only Josef knew the code to open it. The underground space was originally just a small room. Over time, he expanded it into a 600-square-foot bunker with multiple rooms, a bedroom, kitchen, and bathroom. The ceiling was so low, less than 5'6", that no one could stand up straight. There were no windows, and the only light came from a few dim bulbs. A crude ventilation system barely worked. The air was damp and cold all year round. On the 28th of August 1984, Josef tricked Elisabeth into coming downstairs, saying he needed help fixing the basement door. When she bent over to help, he pressed a cloth soaked with chemicals over her mouth and nose. She struggled for a few seconds before losing consciousness. When Elisabeth woke up, she found herself handcuffed to a bed, surrounded by concrete walls. She screamed, cried, begged for help, but the soundproofing was so effective, no one upstairs could hear her. Josef told her, "From now on, this is where you live. If you fight me, no one will hear you. If you disobey, I'll cut off your food and air." Her nightmare had begun. For the next 24 years, Elisabeth lived in that underground dungeon. At first, she was chained up. She couldn't even walk freely. Josef came down every day to bring food and water and to assault her. She tried to fight back, but soon realized it was hopeless. The bunker was designed to be escape-proof. In 1988, Elisabeth became pregnant, alone in the dark, with no doctor, no nurse, and only a few medical books Josef threw at her. She had to give birth by herself. Imagine it, a 2-year-old woman biting down on a towel, giving birth in the damp underground, completely alone. If anything had gone wrong, no one would have saved her. Her first child, a girl named Kirsten, was born that year. Over the years, Elisabeth became pregnant 6 more times. She gave birth to 7 children in total, all fathered by Josef. 3 of the children were taken upstairs by Josef. He claimed Elisabeth had joined a religious cult and had left the babies on the doorstep for him to raise. Rosemary believed him and raised them as her own. The other 3 children grew up in the dungeon. They had never seen the sun, never breathed fresh air, never heard birds or wind. Another child, a twin, died shortly after birth. Josef disposed of the body himself. The children who grew up underground had no concept of the outside world. Their entire universe was a few cramped, damp rooms. They didn't know what the sky was. They didn't know what other people looked like. They learned to read and write from Elisabeth, using whatever scraps Josef provided. She told them stories to keep a small spark of hope alive, but physically they were frail, pale skin, thin bodies, severe vitamin deficiencies. Their teeth were decaying. Their growth was stunted. Mentally, the damage was even worse. For them, the world was just the bunker. Life was waiting for that man to bring food. And what about upstairs? Josef's wife and other children lived right above the dungeon for 24 years. Rosemary believed Joseph's story. Elisabeth had run away and joined a cult. Josef even forged letters from Elisabeth or forced her to write them, claiming she was fine but didn't want to come home. To this day, it's unclear whether Rosemary truly didn't know or simply chose not to see. Investigations later found no evidence she knew about the dungeon. She, too, lived under Josef's control, and he dominated the entire family with fear. But some things are hard to ignore. Josef made frequent trips to the basement with food, supplies, and construction materials. Why didn't anyone question it? Even more chilling, Josef began building the bunker in 1978 when Elisabeth was just 12. That means he had planned everything long before the crime began. Josef's violent tendencies weren't new. In 1967, he had already served prison time for rape. He was known to be controlling and abusive at home. No one dared to disobey him. For Elisabeth, growing up in that house was already a kind of prison. August 1984 only made it literal. In April 2008, Elisabeth's first child, 9-year-old Kirsten, suddenly became gravely ill. She developed a high fever, seizures, and was on the brink of death. Elisabeth begged Josef to take Kirsten to a hospital. At first, he refused, but finally, fearing he might lose his possession, he agreed. But he needed a story. Josef told doctors Kirsten was his granddaughter and that Elisabeth, who had joined a cult, had left her at the doorstep with a note. But the story didn't add up. Doctors immediately noticed something was wrong. Kirsten's skin was ghostly pale, her body severely malnourished, her bones and muscles underdeveloped. She was terrified of everything sunlight, people, even the hospital itself. She didn't know what any of it was. The hospital staff alerted the police. Josef was questioned. He couldn't provide any credible proof of his story. Police reopened Elisabeth's missing person file from 1984. Too many things didn't make sense. Why had she never appeared? Why were the children only dropped off through Josef? Why were all the letters coming through him? On the 26th of April 2008, the police officially summoned Josef Fritzl for interrogation. Under mounting pressure, he finally broke. He confessed. Elisabeth had been locked in the basement the entire time. Police rushed to 40 Yib Street. Josef led them to a hidden concrete door. When they stepped inside, down the narrow stairs, into the damp and low-ceiling dungeon, they were stunned. They found 4 2-year-old Elisabeth and 2 of her children who had never seen daylight. 1 8-year-old Stefan and 5-year-old Felix. Elisabeth looked far older than her age. 24 years of imprisonment had taken everything from her. When officers told her, "You're free now," she couldn't believe it was real. Elisabeth and the children were rushed to the hospital. Doctors found severe anemia, osteoporosis, and malnutrition. The children raised underground were in even worse condition. Delayed growth, skeletal deformities, vision problems caused by years in darkness, and deep psychological scars. For Elisabeth, those 24 years were stolen forever. From 18 to 42, she lost everything a young woman should have had: education, love, freedom, dreams. For the children, stepping into the outside world was overwhelming. Sunlight hurt their eyes. Fresh air made them dizzy. Crowds terrified them. They began long-term therapy to adapt to the world they had never known. In 2009, Josef Fritzl stood trial in Street Polten. Prosecutors charged him with 6 counts, including murder, enslavement, imprisonment, and coercion. The trial attracted global attention. Hundreds of reporters gathered. The world wanted to know what kind of man could do this to his own daughter. Josef initially denied the murder charge, but when the court played Elisabeth's recorded testimony, describing in painful detail everything she had endured for 24 years, he confessed to everything. The courtroom was silent except for quiet sobbing. Josef's lawyer tried to claim mental illness, blaming his childhood, but psychiatric experts said he was fully aware of his actions. This was not a moment of madness. It was a meticulously planned crime, spanning decades. On March 19, after just 4 days of trial, Josef Fritzl was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 15 years before parole eligibility. He was placed in a secure psychiatric facility. As the verdict was read, people outside the courthouse applauded. Justice had been served, but the wounds would last a lifetime. But what came next shocked many. Austria was seen as one of the safest countries in the world. This case shook the entire nation, and not everyone supported the victims. Some people online cruelly accused Elisabeth and Kirsten of bringing shame to the country. Someone even threw rocks through their windows. The government had to step in. They gave Elisabeth and her children new identities, relocated them to a secret safe house, and provided long-term psychological and medical support. Elisabeth showed incredible strength. She began therapy, learned how to use computers and cell phones, and tried to rebuild a normal life. She focused on helping her children slowly adjust to the outside world. The children who had grown up upstairs, believing they'd been abandoned, were also deeply shaken. But eventually, all of Elisabeth's children stood by her. They became a family again. Rosemarie, Josef's wife, was devastated. She had lived with the man for decades without knowing what he truly was. At first, Elisabeth didn't want to see her mother, but eventually she forgave her, realizing that Rosemarie, too, had been controlled and abused. Josef Fritzl, now over 90 years old, is still held in a psychiatric prison. Because of the nature of his crimes, he's kept isolated from other inmates for his own safety. He lives a lonely life in confinement. He has requested transfer to a regular prison. It was denied. He's asked to see Elisabeth and the children. They refused. He even wrote letters to the media, trying to paint himself as a victim of his own past. No one believed him. Nothing could justify what he did. He will likely die behind bars. This story is dark, very dark. But I don't want to end with despair, because even in this darkness, there is light. Elisabeth survived. She didn't let the darkness define her. She's rebuilding her life. She's giving her children a future. I've spent a long time researching this case. Every detail is shocking and heartbreaking. But stories like this must be told, not to feed curiosity, but to remind us that real evil exists and that we must protect ourselves and others. If someone around you is being abused, don't stay silent. If you're in danger, reach out for help. There is darkness in the world, but there is also light, and each of us can be part of that light. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.